Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the CloudNativeFM podcast. Imagine your platform detecting a subtle production regression, rollback, unsafe changes, and pushing a safe patch, all with only a human in a loop for approval. That future is closer than you think. My name is Saim Safdar, and thank you very much for tuning in to the Cloud Native FM episode 143. Today, we are asking the hard question: will AIOps, Agentic DevOps, unlock the new era of productivity or recreate the same economic trap we saw in open source? With restrictive licensing and vendor lock in, we will explore on this podcast some architectural governance and the skills team must build to use agent safely, and who wins or loses when intelligence meet infrastructure. Joining me on this episode for the very first time, Mahir Vora, DevOps Cloud CDF Foundation Ambassador in 2025. And also, here's a link for you. Please, I recommend you to vote Mahir Vora for the DevOps Dozen Award for the two categories DevOps Enterprise Leader for 2025 and also Tech Evangelist for 2025. Link in the description. So please make sure to put your vote for the Mahir. So without any further delay, once again, thank you very much, Mahir, for joining me on this episode and appearing on the Cloud Native FM podcast for the very first time. So give us a quick intro and tell us your 2025 journey.
Thank you so much, Saim. Really honored to be here. I know we've had several conversations about very, very interesting things that are happening in the DevOps world and the platform engineering space. So I'll give you a quick intro. My name is Mahir Vora. I am a CD Foundation ambassador, and I'm a senior distinguished engineer. I work for a financial institution in the US. My passion has been around all things automation, and I think that leads to this conversation very nicely because early in the year I wrote a tech blog on intent based engineering, which was more or less without the hint of AI. I was talking about how human intent can be translated into infrastructure and how it will simplify the aspect of what developers need to do in order for them to be successful with their applications, right? um, with that in mind, like the platform engineering aspect, the whole of 2025 has been a blur for me because there's so much that has happened, so much that has changed. We were talking about vibe coding at the start of the year, maybe late last year, and that has transformed into vibe agentic AI workflows. So it keeps evolving, and I'm so fortunate and glad to be here talking about some of the things that are not only important for the community but also critical for us to talk about where things are going in 2026.
Absolutely. And once again, thank you very much. I will hope to get in touch more with you in the 2026 because some of the internal conversation we have, you have some wonderful knowledge on some of the subject as well. But today we try to give our listeners and readers or anybody who's reading or listening to this podcast, give them some of the glimpses what could happen and what could be the good roadmap for the 2026 as well. But this topic is quite literally been on stuff like for the individual or the contributor or the enterprise engineer. Where should they focusing on more? And the next questions we circle around: will the agentic AI ecosystem will fall trap on the same model as the OSS and commoditized base market work? And that's very fearful debates on the topic right now. We will ask question around what internal org changes role approval escalate and before granting agent real remediation privileges, and how the pricing model works in the agentic ecosystem. Might be we are worried whenever we use open source, what could happen? I accidentally wake up in the morning and see, oh my god, there's a tons of lines of code is no longer available in the open source model and it's now being available in the commercial offering. And unfortunately this happened for some of the project. And that's why I'm asking. And that's the worry for the people who are thinking like we're using Cursor, Cloud Goal, all of these wonderful agentic ecosystem. What could happen if we hit the rate limit or the rate limit become true shrink? We couldn't do anything with the opens or without subscription based model. So those are the natural worries and the question we will be asking on this episode as well. But Mahir, first thing first, I would like to know your opinion. What are the top 3 skills SRE platform engineer must learn for specifically for the agentic era?
Great question, and I keep getting this asked quite a lot. And I've been doing some soul searching on that myself as well. So I think the aspect is to know a little bit of context around what does agentic era mean and why is it a little different than what we used to do. It's basically thinking out loud. It is more from automation to autonomy. Yesterday or today we have individuals who write scripts, runbooks, pipelines, and then agents can observe, decide, and act a little bit today. And then the SREs or the platform engineers, they move from doers to the designers of the safe autonomous way of operations. We've been automating ops for years. Like I said, scripts, you write a Terraform script, you write a CI/CD pipeline. It helps you kind of streamline things. It helps you kind of build automations that can be reused, so on and so forth. The difference now is that agents can take in logs, can take in metrics, can take in runbooks and reason over them, and then actually do things. Like for example, you could have hey, as soon as I have some legacy system where humans basically go in and restart the service every now and then, you can have an agent keep monitoring it. As soon as certain thresholds are hit, just go restart the service. Or as soon as you're deploying something, today there's a human in the loop who says hey, I did kind of a canary deployment, 10% traffic on the system. Now I start seeing some errors. I'm going to go roll back. That's where agents would come in and say hey, you don't need to go babysit this thing. I'm going to keep an eye on it and I'm going to auto roll back. Now, obviously, that's the general framing of it. So the idea is we shift from I wrote a bash script to hey, I designed this safe autonomous workflow that can act without me watching every step, but then I will only get involved when I need to get involved. That's the context for everything, everything else that kind of encompasses this work stream of agentic workflows, I think. Now, going back to your question of what are the top 3 things that I care about personally is how do I design safe agentic workflows? That's something that's very core to my thinking. How do you have machine-friendly observability and knowledge? That way, when those agents take action, they need to reason over some observable piece of code or metric or threshold or some sort of alerting mechanism that it triggers it. And then how do you manage risk? And that's where we can kind of think of a little bit of policy as code and governance and auditability around this ecosystem. Now, if you already have the basics, the SRE basics, the SLOs, the incident management, and infrastructure as code to start with, these are the three things that that would be slightly different in the agentic world. First is you design a safe agent workflow, not just script, like we talked about. Those actual workflows are important to have guardrails. So you need to have the right level of protection in the system baked in, so that nothing bad or nothing crazy will happen. Like we've heard those incidents, hey, XYZ system wiped out 4,000 lines of my code without me knowing what it was doing, and then or my test started failing, or some things that happen out of the box, right? The second is making observability and knowledge usable by machines, not just humans. So the CD Foundation has a project, associated project called CD Events, where we are trying to define an interoperable spec for deployment events that come out of the pipeline. These are standard deployment events. We will need to have something like that, and basically that too, in order for all the tools to kind of have an interoperability, where the agent, regardless of what agent it is, understands that spec because it's a standard and it can take action because it's getting. it's getting like the inputs from every stage, every action that's happening in the pipeline or in the workflow. It's taking action based on that standard spec that it's getting. It's similar to OTEL, the Open Telemetry project, where you have a very streamlined way of monitoring and metrics and how you kind of send those events over the OTEL. I think that's more or less like how I would think of like observability, where making machines read those in order for it to be consistent. And then the third thing is treating risk and policy as first class design concerns. Um, I worked in this space, like in a highly regulated financial environment and whatnot, right? So that kind of helps me think that, it's very easy. It comes naturally to me. But that's another area with the rise of agentic workflows. The moment an agent can act in prod, you are in the risk management territory. So you need to ensure that you have the right level of governance, right level of auditability, right level of policy as code kind of risk framework that would help you with kind of evolving this ecosystem.
Yes, that's totally we've seen this happening from the beginning of 2025 to the end of the year, and it's been rightly been reflected with some of the news we happen to see in the recently AWS reInvent. They announces the AWS DevOps agent. It's been happening. They announces some sort of the compliance and policies check for the agent as well. And I think it's important for the tools like Cursor, Cloud Code, and bunch of the other to have some sort of permission model set up. Because remember, at the end of the day, it's like agentic tooling calling third-party system, and we never know what it's calling, what permission he has, and the third-party system is calling some other external services. We need to trap those, trace those trajectory of the tooling, and if you give them the full permission, then the permission flow from top bottom to the highest priority, like top permission, top permission, and top permission. Even though your MCP doesn't hack or had you have built up a very good model, but the external system got those permissions set, and we live in the kind of base images world. Like if somebody add a wrong image into your pipeline, the rest of the territory has been compromised. So those are definitely, I think, we keep seeing, we keep hearing about those skills are, I think, not even a mandatory this time. It's crucial for staying in the business in a longevity of the system to be working on as well. Other than that, you falling in a trap of setting all the thing up, and you only find those access parameter compromise when the outages are happening. I recently see two outages on the Cloudflare as well, and some people
Yep.
try to blame the AIs for those outages. So it's very neat to hear about those concepts. But Mahir, we now the next question where we see in the community we are involved in, there's a lot of conversation happening. So I need to know your thoughts on this subject. Does the agentic ecosystem look headed toward concentrated proprietary stack or a healthy OSS plus commoditized model market?
Before I go there, one thing that came to my mind when you were talking about the risk, right? I think it's important for us to have the risk mindset. What is safe that can be fully automated to what's suggest only, and what's always human. Like there will always be an aspect of where you always will have a human, and then you need to capture that as who, what, where, when, and how a little bit, and you log every agent action as if it were a human engineer. So you can explain later what happened and why. I think that kind of sums up into what you were saying. You don't know necessarily why a certain thing is happening until and unless you have auditability around it. So the risk mindset is extremely important, as you said. Um, are we heading towards a single kind of agent operating system or one mega stack that rules everything? I don't know if I would agree to that just yet. I think so. So big strategic question is whether we are heading towards one or two platforms or three platforms that everyone's forced into. I don't think that's how it plays out. I think we will see like a lot of gravity wells around big cloud and vendors come along, especially at the model and managed platform layers. So think of it as like, at the edges there's like telemetry, events, protocols. I see a lot of healthy push towards openness because everything has to interoperate. You don't want to be part of a vendor who's locked into its own kind of world and own kind of ecosystem, because then as soon as something else evolves in the environment or in the community or the industry, you're going to be locked out of it. So while you can have like core kind of platforms where you use the models or you use some sort of ecosystem around it, and like some cloud providers do an excellent job where they give the choice of usage of the model that they host for you, and then you can build your organizational dynamics around it. Like you can have like I'm just making it up. You can have an assumption that you have 1-2 anchor systems where you have a cloud provider and an AI model that you kind of use out of the box. But then I would insist on an open, integration with those open telemetry or event standards, or some APIs, SDKs that would give interoperability with different vendors behind the scenes. There's a lot of startups coming up. There's a lot of new capabilities that are kind of coming up. I expect the baseline agent features to be commoditized, hopefully, but practically most organizations will anchor on 1 or 2 ecosystems, and then you can still protect optionality by using like open telemetry standards, like I said, and then on top of that you build your own kind of internal abstractions. Like I have a client that's working inside my company, let's say, or my organization, that's basically like an API interface for my dev tooling to use. So switching vendors in the backend becomes easy because then you're not making a developer facing change. You're just swapping in, swapping out, and the platform engineering layer takes care of the complexities to manage what is happening in the backend. The user is kind of not necessarily involved because it's a black box to them. The black box is the platform engineering box, which the platform teams can provide the lift for, making sure they are doing the best and the latest and greatest thing. One thing to keep in mind is things like log summarization or basic rollback suggestion. I think those things are something that are easy to build, but are also going to be pioneered by a lot of organizations out there. And open source community will play a major role in shaping some of those. Like the real differentiation will be governance, and that governance is more fit with the stack or with the domain that you are part of. Like for example, a healthcare company might care about it differently than an oil and gas sector company or a bank, or like another company where there's less regulation. That's where the domain tuning comes into the play, and that's where you build your own kind of customizations on top of the core anchored models or the cloud providers that you have.
Yes, 100%. Because I think we see some sort of the natural fear for the people is we're using Tropic, we're using OpenAI, we're using Gemini as a base layer for talking to the LLM layer. What happen if some sort of pricing or the rate limits has been changed? Is will drastically affect the other businesses as well? And a lot of the business people try to call it is a AI wrapper companies. They're providing some of the new assessment list or new capabilities on top of the foundational model. If some of the foundational model changes something, the rest of the ecosystem is also being quite heavily adopted as well. And some say the AI is eating up the open source space, like they're making open source more automation, more autonomous. People can use it just by asking question. Oh, please create a Kubernetes cluster for me. Oh, here's a cluster for you. Please install Argo CD on top of it. Yes, here's Argo CD for you. So those things, I think people are happy with all of these things, but there's a natural worry, like if something has been pricey, what should be the focus on as well. But the next question, we move on into the privileges section, where I want your opinion on what internal org changes, roles, approval, escalation are required before granting a real remediation privileges. And I'm asking this because a lot of the tool these days is providing remediation. So what sort of the strategies we can provide to the tool with the RBAC model or remediation?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think before agents touch prod, what must change internally? Like, what safeguards should you have? What things should you? Now, this is more like a safety question, but I think of it as like four buckets. I kind of divide that into four. One is ownership. Who owns the workflows? Who designs the workflows? One is approvals. Should the human approve certain critical actions where it could have a drastic impact? Third is incidents, when something breaks, how you kind of recover from it. And the fourth one is more like audit and education that you get, like insights that you can generate from the system. Now, if you can't answer who owns this agent, what can it do, and how do we stop it, you're not ready for like real autonomy. So first thing is like, you need to go think like why a certain agent needs to be there, who owns the actions of these agents, and like if something goes terribly wrong, how do you have a kill switch to kind of stop it, right, before it can do more damage, right? So from that standpoint, I think each agent should technically have some sort of a supervisory like definition of like what this agent is going to do and who owns this. Maybe it's a team, maybe it's a platform engineer, maybe it's someone who's authorizing this agent to take action on their behalf. The approvals and incidents are more like every serious, so an on-call SRE, for example, or a platform engineer effectively becomes the supervisors. They watch what the agent's doing during incidents and intervene when necessary. So it's like there's human in the loop, but humans kind of outside the loop watching the inner loop, right? Um, Coming to approvals, I think you can't have like today you can have like email based approvals. You can say, hey, so and so person, can you approve this change? And they say, I approve, and then someone goes and does something manually, right? You'll need policies that say that in this environment, for this risk tier, this agent can proceed automatically or must get a human sign off before it can do something else. This is true when they are trying to change a production config because they saw some out of memory. They go and say, hey, I'm just going to go bump up the capacity of the instance. Great. It seems like harmless, but then there's a cost angle to it. There's like other angles to it which might not be coded properly in the agent, or like the agent's probably not guarded against those sensible defaults. That's when it starts getting into like scarier territory, right? For incidents, I think we need to treat the agent as a participant. Like runbooks should spell out what the agent may attempt to do. Obviously, you need a kill switch, and you need to ask in every postmortem, for example, like, did the agent help or hurt, and did it stay within its guardrails? And that kind of becomes kind of an inside or feedback loop into how you develop workflows. So that's where it's kind of a loop where you have the owner defined, and then you are asking it to approve or like act during an incident, and based on those actions it goes back to the owner saying like, hey, do you need to fix this workflow? Do you need to go make updates to how the agent is handling certain things, right? So that's basically what my perspective is on like treating agents as first class teammates, but with caution that you don't give them keys to the kingdom until unless you trust them completely.
Was absolutely 100%. That's the case, because I think what we see, because we're moving into AI ops era. Some people saying in the internet, I've seen some posting saying 2026 is a year of AI ops or the Agentic DevOps model. And I think from the company's perspective, from the vendor company's perspective, what I'm seeing the push towards observability take action. This says there's a time now nobody is actually looking at the alerts. There's something goes wrong, here's an alert for you in the Slack, and the company, somebody from the engineering team pay a very close attention to it, and then find out there's only you need to update the CPU in terms of 250 to 400 and 400. It's just a very minor change, and still the human is involved. Why not we ask an agent to do that as well? And I think these days agent can do just more than that. They can fix a cluster, they can patch a cluster, they can update a fix, they can see some of the obsolete APIs going through that, they can update those as well. So with those things happening, I think it's crucial, as you pointing out earlier in the conversation, to set up some policies at the guardrails at the highest level and make sure the RBAC is set up properly. Otherwise, you ruined your day for thinking who actually done this update to my YAML file. Is it a new engineering team or is it a AI? At the end of the day, as you're seeing in the networking, is always been DNS. Is not always been the AIOps or Agentic DevOps for the culprit.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point, and I think I don't think I mentioned this before. I've been working on a kind of a white paper about the trust budgets part of the agents. So the agents can have privileges to do certain things, but when should they have and how long should they have the permissions? I think it's something that we need to look very closely at. The trust budgets are very important, and I think I'm hoping that I'll be done with the white paper. I can share it with you. It's something that I want to kind of figure out a mechanism, like you have policy as code. How do you kind of give the agent permission for a limited set of time? That way, it's not like super wide access for the entirety of time. Only give them access when they need it, like you have privileged access management, right?
Yes.
For making a change in production for a human, you basically say, hey, go check out these credentials, then you go log in and do something. It should be more or less like that, where the agents only take action when they can, for however long of a duration they are allowed to do it, right? So that's basically what I feel like, is something that we'll see a lot in 2026.
100%. And on the same perspective, it's a new question for you, Mahir. What pricing model will create the strongest vendor lock-in, and how can buyers avoid them? And I'm asking this because I see in the platform engineering there's are multiple IDPs have been set up, and a lot of those IDPs is using some sort of open source capabilities, and I'm worried that the open source is actually being quite of in a transition phase where companies is switching everyone to buy their enterprise tiers. So if some of the IDPs internal using those open source that end up going into the enterprise tiering, and we actually have to pay the double price as a consumer of the platform. You have to pay the double, one for the IDP and one for the open source model. So do you have some strategies if somebody adopting an IDP and open source in general? How should they go about them?
Honestly, this is not my area of expertise, but I have a point of view that I can share. I think what I've observed is, like, there's one pattern, is like, there's this fuzzy credit model where you basically have like agent runs, or agent actions that are being taken care of by the agent are changing vendor to vendor. So one vendor can define it as like, hey, it's based on tokens. The other can define it based on duration. The other can define it based on like how much data, like, download, egress, or even like, the data that you're pulling. There's different models that come in. I think the massive commitments that most vendors ask is like, hey, we'll give you a discount if you tie in with us longer. That's where observability, AIOps, agents, they're all rolled into one kind of number, right? That's a little bit of opaque, foggy thing for me. And then there's like, obviously the IP capture and the sensitivity of data and how you host it in house versus what goes outside. You pay to fine tune the models or build agents, but the vendor owns the resulting artifact. And like, who owns the proprietary output of whatever you customize on top of what the vendor is providing, right? There's some nuances there. I think like, just thinking out loud, right? There are ways to kind of protect oneself from doing that, like, contractually insist on clear units which are kind of comparable. The challenge is like one model or one vendor's kind of token unit might not be the same as another. and you can't basically have an apples to apples comparison. So ask for like, hey, how does it mean? What does it mean? And maybe that clarity will give you like, some sort of comparison between different competing products and vendors. Architecturally, I think everyone should own their own data. So again, like it's core to your business, then sending telemetry into your environment first, then out to the vendors makes sense. But I think you need to have clear guidelines around like who owns the data, where the data is going to sit, what regulatory controls would the vendor have or your organization would need in order for that data to be protected. Things like those are more security, cyber risk kind of concerns that you need to bring in, and ensure that like when you're kind of talking like how those interfaces are going to play out, because a lot of times like you have like internal interfaces that you need, but they are not really readily available from the vendor. So then you end up building this middle layer or middle tier, which is just translating things. And that's one way to protect yourself. And that's what I would say as like building healthy or like simple abstractions that could give you the lift in terms of not being vendor tied in. So this industry is evolving so fast, and it's a fascinating time to be part of this industry where everything changes in every few weeks or every few days, right? And that's where this locking piece is more like, how do I protect my organization if I have to swap this for that? And that's where you build the platform engineering team kind of builds this abstraction layer that's fronting the developers or your consumers that would not necessarily know how the internal functions are. You're not exposing the complexity of managing this, and the platform team provides that lift where you kind of switch in, switch out things as you need without basically making any changes on the side of the consumer.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think I would love to see a role in the near future, or might be the role already exists, where we can actually journalizing somebody in the organizations or the team has the responsibility to look up the foundational model, how they have been evolving, what pricing criteria is they have, how much sustainability into those model as well, and comparing and finding the right model where the all rest of the companies is reliant upon as well. Also in terms of the selecting the appropriate tooling in the platform engineering and IDP space, I would love to see some role evolving that has the responsibility to understand why this open source tool is crucial for me, under which circumstances and under which use cases as well. I see there's some broader role exists in the ecosystem, and that's why we love platform engineering, because they try to ask these questions quite extensively in the round table of the discussion within the organization we have, rather than just a tooling centric conversation. We're talking about the futuristic point of view, like, oh, which model to adopt, which agent to adopt, which open source tool to consider, how the pricing model affect us in our development team, our engineering team, our customers, our buyers, our relationship. So I think it's nightly we have some sort of anatomy there as well. But I love to I have to resume or stop the conversation here, but really enjoy the listening and talking to Mahir, because he has some wonderful insight to those conversations as well. And if you find some of the debates really useful, one thing you can do right now is you click on the YouTube description link and vote for the DevOps Dozen Award for the Mahir on the DevOps Enterprise Leader category and the evangelist category as well, because I think he's done wonderful work in the CDF community side of things, and amount of knowledge he possesses, I think, has been wonderful for our listeners and our readers for the podcast as well. So Mahir, I will be interrupting you more in the 2026, and look forward to have more debates with you on these very important conversation as well. So from my key takeaways from the conversation I have with Mahir, agentic AI and AIOps can dramatically reduce toil, but power needs rule, policy as code, human approval, and audit trail. Vendor lock is risk is always been real. Watch for the bundle proprietary model, runtime telemetry with no migration path. Open source runtimes plus commodity model are the safest economy path, but only if the model and data layers don't become closed ecosystem. SRE and platform teams need hybrid skill, observability, prompt engineering, in particular, model ops, and governance. And OSS contributor should prioritize safe defaults, policy hooks, test harness, and clear licensing and governance to resist for co-option as well. And if you find this conversation useful, make sure to add some question in the YouTube comment section, and I will add those to Mahir in the near episode as well. Thank you.
You're too kind, Saim. Thank you so much for doing this. Appreciate your time. I'll just say this one last thing. Like I've spent most of my career in large organizations trying to make software delivery safer and faster. Whether it's like standardizing CI/CD at scale, or now as a CD Foundation's ambassador, like working with like broader community on what agentic DevOps even looks like. One pattern that keeps repeating is the teams who win are the ones who design for intent and trust. So if I have to give one key takeaway, I think we need to start thinking about removing the friction between what we intend to do and what our systems actually do. And my hope is that folks listening live with one question: where can they start designing that trust and purpose this year into the next year? And as the industry evolves, we don't just get cooler tools, but we get systems that fail more gracefully, or teams spend more time on real engineering, and an ecosystem that stays open and adaptable instead of like someone forced into it. So yeah, thank you so much for this. You're too kind, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.